welcome to the Integration Station. I'm your host, Michael, a child and adolescent occupational therapist, and with me today is Eleanor.
I'm also a child and adolescent occupational therapist.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Sounded a little bit congested, but I'm feeling good. Just
husky voice.
Yeah, that's okay. Get on the phone lines.
Yeah.
We are going to go through some questions today. We already had some for our TikTok listeners earlier, so jump on social media if you want to have a listen to some of those questions and answers, some really cool ones there. But if you do have any other questions, please send them through to our podcast at OTFC Group email, or OTFC Group on Instagram is our handle.
Yeah.
Plenty of ways to get in contact with us, and Eli will filter through every single one of them. So thank you very much for that. Find the fun in learning how to support the young people in our lives, I think.
We try to.
We definitely do. And we will have some fun by going through our regular segments. Should we start with our first one? Activity of the week?
Oh, you're all over it. Let's do it.
Done.
Therapy, activity of the week.
How about this for a cop-out? I've got an activity of the week and regulation strategy of the week in one.
I love a combo.
Combo. Probably not a cop-out, it's a combo. Do you want me to go first then?
Yeah, you sounded very excited to share it, so you go.
Well, on Tuesday, I had a group of young adults, my life skills group, one of my life skills groups that I run, which is great. They came back for term 3. We went through an activity to develop our own fidget toy.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah,
So
that's great.
There are a few different things that we did, but we landed on the balloon squishy. So you can do it with rice or flour.
Yeah.
It's like the squishy toy you have for your hands, like a hand, essentially like a stress ball.
Yeah.
But yeah, we ended up making that. So we used some corn flour. We had a balloon, 2 balloons, one balloon that you fill with the corn flour through a funnel, fill it up to a certain point, tie it up, and then cut off the top, add another balloon over the top.
Yeah, double
bag it, and then it's a nice little squishy thing. And they were able to draw designs on there as well.
Do they enjoy that?
You know what? I think in the end they did actually enjoy the sensory components of it, but it was actually really hard from a fine motor perspective.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? So it worked in a number of ways. I think the drawing aspect, once they had finished making it and they were able to draw some things on there, was quite regulating. They enjoyed just colouring and drawing and doing different designs. But the actual task of filling the first balloon with the corn flour was quite tricky. Okay. It was quite tricky, and it certainly worked on some skills there. But once they'd made it, I made one for myself. I brought it home. My son loved it. He's like, "Oh, is this for me?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can take it." It was just such a great tactile little.
Yeah, it would be.
Just really enjoyed the feel of it, and it just fit in the palm of the hand, and the soft nature of that balloon as well. Had a nice little regulation.
I think the corn flour, that's a nice feeling.
It is, as opposed to just flour. The corn flour has a bit more. I don't know, it's a bit stickier. It's grippy. Yeah, grippy, yeah. So anyway, that was the activity of the week that I did and
you had a little reg strat after.
Yes.
I love that. I actually can't tie a balloon. Can't do it. I'll just leave that sit with you, shall I? I would have needed some help in that activity.
It's hard.
It's hard.
There was
sympathising.
There was definitely help needed on Tuesday when I did it. It is a very, very, very tricky skill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I had one of each, so shall I just go?
Yeah, go.
Therapy activity of the week, and then of course I can't not let the Reg Strut song play out, so we'll bring that in just a second. But my therapy activity, a little update on the wedgets conversation that we were having last week, I think it was, because that, like I said, when we were talking about that, I'm like, man, I got to bring the wedgets back out. So I brought out the wedgets with a couple of clients this week. And the way that we did it was we had the hammock swing on the Flying Fox on the zip line, which meant that we could have a station initially where you could collect the pieces from. And then on the other end of the truck, we had the picture that they were building from.
Oh, yeah.
So we had various coloured blocks of various colours, and then we had the picture that they had to build from using those blocks in a certain order in a certain way, and how they fit together to create the picture looks a bit different depending on what you're building. But we ended up, well, I guess by having them on different ends, and I'd say you can only collect 2 pieces at a time, they had to look at the picture, analyse what was going to come next, do a little bit of that forward thinking, but then when they get to the other end, can they remember the pieces that they needed? Where were they up to? And that was quite tricky for some of my friends, actually, and I thought that was a really great observation for me to understand that for them, especially when I increased the complexity. And the next round, I had them scattered along the path, and so I'd say you have to get 2 pieces, but only using your right hand. So I purposely scattered them in a way, like keep your body straight so you can't turn towards it, and you had to reach using your right hand or your left hand. And I'm trying to encourage across the body reaching.
Sure.
So they had to remember the hand, the pieces, and how many they had to collect as well. So lots of working memory elements, plus the visual motor task of actually looking at the picture, using the visual system, and then the skill to build. Plus they're in a hammock swing lying prone the entire time. So they're working their core muscles as well.
Did you do this yourself as well or not?
I did not, but I think I could do them.
You reckon?
Yeah, I do.
Geez, sounds like a lot. But
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And so, we just layered that in like over time to that final level. But that was
Great
quite
activity.
good.
Excellent.
So shall we then go from here? Reg strat.
Yeah.
You've already done yours. I'll dive straight into mine.
Okay.
A theme song first.
Okay.
Regulation, the strategy of the week.
I have another extension from a previous podcast. We were asked the other week about fun ways to introduce deep breathing techniques. And I had 2 that came out just in my sessions this week that I can add to that, but also supported some regulation for my clients. The first of which was bubbles, and
Oh, yeah.
which is just, I think bubbles are great for so many reasons because there's a visual aspect to it. It can have quite a calming impact, but even just the deep breathing, like I was modeling taking that really deep breath in and then a slow, controlled deep breath out to then maximize how many bubbles I was able to blow with the wand. And I was taking it in turns with my client at the end, and I very strategically incorporated it towards the end of a session when we've been having a bit of a tricky time transitioning out of the space. We set that up very differently this time, and he was able to move out like an absolute pro. And I think there were lots of things that played there that helped that. But I think just doing something a little bit slower. And while we were doing it, he's like climbing on equipment and in squishy little spaces and all that kind of stuff too. So he's still getting that input. But I was thinking even in the moment, it's a really nice way to encourage deep breathing. And it's a bit of that like cause and effect too to make it motivating. And then that really facilitated our transition out. And the other way that I had been doing the deep breathing, I know we spoke about caterpillar or like 5-finger breathing, but there's also like a lazy 8. You know, imagine the 8 on the side and you can do, the same thing. It's like the old ABC. ABC.
Oh my gosh. Haven't seen that for a while.
Yeah.
They should bring that back. They brought back
That's a bit retro. They should do that.
But they brought back the old news theme. Why didn't they bring back the old
And you need like what do you call them? A sparkler?
Yes.
And you can do it in the air,
Yeah, sorry. So
Oh,
you go back
look,
to
that's a third fun way to do deep breathing. Get a sparkler.
That's true, yes. Yeah,
and pretend, deep
Great.
breaths in and out. But yes, I'd actually encouraged drawing the lazy 8. So 8 on the side, it's kind of like the infinity symbol really, on like a shower wall or something like that. Because once again, I'm trying to encourage crossing the midline activities with this friend. But you can really do it as a deep breathing exercise too. So starting in the center of your body, drawing part of that out, taking a deep breath in. Once you cross over the middle to the other side, taking a deep exhale out and just drawing along like that. So yeah.
Great.
A few additional fun ways to incorporate deep breathing, a few extra purposes aligned with each of them as well.
Yeah, and tactile as well, so it's incorporating other sort of sensory paradigms as well and modalities. Great. We did get a question that came through. It probably is enough for an episode, I reckon.
Yeah. It's a big one.
Yeah. It's probably heaps of information here as well. And it's about autism and hormonal changes in teenage years and any tips.
Yeah. So I guess how we thought we'd break this down is hormonal changes in teenage years just as its own little segment.
Yep.
And then we consider what that might look like for an autistic young person. And then from there, well, how can we support what some of those things might look like?
Well, why don't we start with the hormonal changes in the teenage years?
Yeah.
And as we know, hormones change. You know, there's increases in estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, and that can affect and change how, you know, things like mood swings and different ways that teenagers present. And often when we have parents that say, oh, you know, the anecdotal like, oh, it's teenager behavior or that sort of thing. And that's that is a natural part of development. Like that's what happens with the brain. So there's neurological change in the brain in that period, and without going into too much detail, there is changes in prefrontal cortex, and the way the brain is developing over that period will change.
Yeah.
It's why you get more impulsive behaviors. It's why you get difficulties with people, with teenagers being able to manage impulse control and some of those sort of things.
Even being flexible in thinking and being able to problem solve things that are going on, like that space is under construction. And then when we add those shifts in hormones, which can of course impact upon emotional responses and how that legitimately feels for that young person in themselves, it does make some of those conversations and experiences quite tricky in a day.
Yeah. So that's for, say, a neurotypical teenager. So for say an autistic teenager, autistic individual, this is probably exacerbated even more. There's probably even more change going on there. The one thing I would say is that for some autistic individuals, they can experience these hormonal changes a little bit earlier. So it's not uncommon for, and I've seen this with some of the clients I've worked with, for them to experience, whether it's male or female, at sort of 10, 11 years of age, that they're experiencing things like menstruation cycles, and that is happening a bit earlier than some of the hormonal changes that you would expect in a neurotypical population. So these are huge things for a person to take on. So you think about the brain is changing, the body is changing, things like puberty, things like hormone, like all those different changes in the body. What we know, particularly for a lot of our autistic individuals, is that change is a massive thing, right? Yeah. So changes in routines, changes in things that happen in a day are huge. Internally, there are changes going on during this period. And so how unsettling is that for them?
Yeah.
That they think they know themselves and they know where they are in the world, and they're just starting to get to grips on maybe who they are a bit more.
Yeah.
And then all these things change in their brain, all these things change in their body, all these hormones start to kick in. Of course, it's going to trigger a whole bunch of different responses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a young person who might already be experiencing, and I guess we're talking about it in the autistic space because that's what the question's asked, but I think this would be regardless of what that young person's managing, for someone who is perhaps more sensitive by temperament, or there are other things that they're managing. Like if you're someone that is a deep feeler or can feel things quite intensely, and how we respond in the moment is something that we're actively working on. When you bring in these things like shifts in your neurological and hormonal development, that can certainly make some of those things feel different or bigger or shift again, like you were mentioning before. And so I think when you've got some of those underlying areas that you're potentially working towards, that can be exacerbated during these developmental phases.
Whilst it's not necessarily mentioned in the question, but I guess it does have an impact when we talk about hormonal changes, but there are changes in the teenage years and things like sleep patterns, things like food, things like sleep, things like engagement in exercise. As changes in a person's body and hormones take hold, the body is adapting to that. And so one thing we do know is that for a lot of teenagers, sleep does change and sleep patterns do change. It's not the case for everyone, but for the majority of teenagers, you will see maybe slightly delayed sleeping, or you have
wanting
things
to stay up later and
and
sleeping
that's
a little bit more,
and that is if you look at any of the research on that very much is a developmental stage of life. Like that is something that happens. So a lot of parents go, oh, they're staying up later, or I can't get to sleep earlier. And I think it's really important to have that awareness that is actually quite natural, that naturally happens. A lot of those things are biologically occurring in the individual.
Yes.
Now that doesn't mean that it's easy, but those hormonal fluctuations and sleep pattern changes can certainly impact a person's mood, can certainly impact a person's attention or engagement in things like school and other functional areas. And so when I'm thinking of the hormonal changes and how they would affect neurotypical or even autistic teenagers, if we focus on the question about autistic teenagers, this is where we can start seeing functional changes in day-to-day life, such as things like school attendance, engagement in extracurricular activities, even daily routines. Like puberty brings on smells, it brings on having to shower more regularly. For some of the people that we see, like that's really overwhelming. There's a whole sensory sensitivity aspect there that can be exacerbated by the increase in the changes in the body.
Yeah.
And there's an increased, need to be able to maintain effective, whether it's hygiene or increasing the amount of daily routines.
Yeah.
As a result of going through teenagehood.
Absolutely. And how tricky is it if you're already managing something like sensory differences or sensitivities, and then you're adding in some of these complex things that are involved with managing these routines and, body odor, menstruation, those sorts of aspects that can make that really hard to manage, or even potentially be a newer experience that we're still learning how to manage all of that input and what that feels like. It's a lot to take on for any young person. And then when we add in some of those sensory differences that an autistic young person might experience, I think that can be a really tough space too. I think there's lots of really cool things available to support through that. And I think the options that we have in managing some of these components, whether it is from, the physical aspect or the what we need to manage as part of a routine, which provides opportunities for those that do find sensory aspects of these things quite tough, and good to find a way forward that feels good for them.
Yeah, and it's always collaborative. You're trying to find something that works. And certainly we're talking about, if we think about practical tips and strategies in order to work through this, then certainly we need to be, and we talk about it all the time, is to be collaborative with that individual. And I'm a very strong advocate of what works for one person works for that person, and
Totally.
we need to be quite bespoke in what we're suggesting. One thing I do want to mention is the social and identity changes that happen in that period as well.
I think that's really important.
And a lot of that is, there are hormonal components there, and I think that's part of it as well. But there is also, as I said earlier, about the changes in the brain that happen, and people's identity is starting to form. And I'll just mention a story. It actually happened recently in one of my social skills groups.
Yep.
And we were doing sometimes we do sort of questions where people just write down thoughts on a Post-it note and they submit it, and then I just put it up, not for anybody to see, but behind the board, and I just read out different people's answers. So it's anonymous.
Yeah.
But often what happens is people go, yep, I said that.
Yeah.
Because they feel comfortable enough.
You create a very safe space for that to be.
Over time we have.
Yeah.
I feel like we have.
Yeah.
But one thing that came up, and it was quite sad to hear, was one of the individuals that the question was, what was one thing that you would change about yourself? It was one thing you want to change about yourself. And, I think I put down, being more accountable and being more organised, and, that was my response. And others put down, trying to be kinder to friends, and some put down, I'm the GOAT, I don't need to change anything, which was great. I love that, the self-confidence.
Yeah.
But one actually put down to take away is autism. And I remember reading that, and I remember thinking, do I read this out or not? And this is a group of 6 or 7 autistic teenage boys, and I guess the reason I felt okay to read it out was just to highlight that taking something like that away from an individual, I can understand why that person has put that down there, because they have felt that there are parts of themselves that they have found challenging because they're autistic. So when I read it out, I got a really interesting response. The individual actually said, yep, that was me that wrote that.
Okay.
And they mentioned some things about why. And, when I'm thinking about development and going back to the question about, hormones and changes and adolescence, particularly for autistic individuals, a lot of this identity goes through teenage years into adolescence. And we think about adolescence, we're thinking about, 21, 22, like that's the brain's still developing quite significantly up to 25 years of age, right? So that's what we have to really be aware of. And for this individual, his perception was that there were things like his fixation on particular topics that he couldn't stop himself from liking, but found that was socially impacting him. And it was really interesting. There was another young lad in the group who's generally quite quiet, but actually piped up and said, I actually thought that as well. When I was 15, I actually thought the same thing. Sure. I was going through that experience and thought, I don't want to be autistic anymore. I want to take that away. And he talked about his coping strategies in the way that he worked through that. And, I won't go into detail specifically, but the way that he was able to share that experience by the end of it, and this was only about a 5-10 minute conversation. By the end of it, this other young lad had heard the experience of this other boy and one of the others, and actually changed his thought about it and realized, if I take away my autism, it takes away a part of me and actually changes who I am.
Yeah.
And my interest in these particular areas, I think he realized they probably would be there regardless if he was autistic or not. And the biggest thing for me and why I run a lot of the groups is because a lot of the young autistic people that I work with find social identity such a challenge, and they're often misunderstood.
Yeah.
And they're working so hard to try and, process all the things, whether it's hormonal, whether it's social, whatever it is in their life, to be able to have a forum or an environment where they're able to share that experience with someone else is such a massive, massive thing.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of questions that these young people are asking of themselves, but don't always have the opportunity to answer or have them be answered.
Yeah.
And whilst I didn't have a clear answer for him, he himself, through those conversations with some of the others in the group, was able to come up with something that in that moment changed his view. And I think that was really powerful and a really clear opportunity that, really clear example of how important when we're talking about, strategies and things to work through stuff is lived experience and a shared connection and that ability to share your own experience and to hear from someone who also had a similar experience, came out of it and was able to say, I feel this now and I am comfortable with the fact that I'm autistic and I see that as a point of difference and something that I can celebrate. And I know that's not everyone's experience. I understand that. But for someone else to be able to hear that, I think can really, really support a change of perception and be a really, great opportunity to validate a person's emotional experience.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful story. It's always hard to hear how conversations like that might start because you never want someone to feel like they can't just be the truest version of themselves. And actually, when I hear things like that, I guess where my response might be if someone was to share that with me in a session or in a group is that, well, actually, is that what you want taken away, or do you want what's hard in the world around you to look different? Because it's actually not. It's not them by any means, is it? It's trying to keep up and navigate a world that in so many areas isn't built for those different brains, and that's another conversation in itself. We have a very long way to go with that. But I think, like you said, creating a space where someone can, all those internal thoughts that maybe we've not felt safe enough to share, but when you're in a space where you actually been able to connect with people that you might describe as your tribe or like-minded, or an environment where actually someone might be able to get this experience. And the fact you didn't have to have an answer to that. You just needed to create that environment so they could share that. And the outcome might have looked different in a conversation like that. But what a gorgeous thing that other young man was able to speak and offer what that looked like. And this has even reminded me, I had the chance to reconnect with a gorgeous human I had worked with previously. This is often what happens for me in my caseload. I work with young people at Parkside, and once they turn 12, 13, we often look to move them to Mile End, and I see them a little bit more sporadically. But I remember having a conversation with this young person, and they were just so driven to connect socially, but had a very unfortunate experience with peers, and what we know, can be so tough for so many autistic young people, and how that's met by others and bullying that they can experience as a result. And I think actually I'd heard a statistic recently that it's something like at least 48% of neurodivergent young people can manage a degree of those sorts of interactions. And she had shifted, she had moved, she's doing more of like an online learning platform now and connecting with others who are perhaps in a similar space. And she was sharing with me about her friends that she'd made and how much she's loving that. And I shared with her a conversation that we'd had in which I had said, man, how hard for you as a teenager to know that you're just in this environment at school where you just happen to be grouped with a certain cohort of people, and are your people and tribe necessarily within that? It's hard to know. And I really hope that one day that's through additional opportunities, you're able to find that. And when I shared that with her, she's like, I always remember that conversation too. And I'm finding my people. And that just brought me so much joy, knowing where that had looked for her, and that being a big contributor to why the mainstream school environment wasn't the right fit. And I think you're so right. For teenagers going through these changes, they're learning more about that bodily and mental autonomy and what they know of themselves and what that means for them in this world that we experience. Really hard to find your people at that point in time too, which is super tough. Well, I actually feel like that probably leads in quite well then. So knowing what some of these changes might look like, what some of those experiences might look like, and thinking about how these might relate to an individual's experience, I think that supports itself really well in going, well, how can we best support these beautiful young people through these pivotal years? And yes, I would certainly say the connection piece is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Even though I also get that maybe someone going through this might be reluctant or unsure or not feeling how those opportunities might best fit for them, but trying to set it up in a way that is, maybe it's on, even you're speaking about your friend's special interests, like is there an opportunity to explore that? So it's less around connecting with other autistic young people, but hey, do you want to go meet with this group who also love Dungeons and Dragons, Minecraft, whatever, and you can speak so passionately with other people who also love that, and then you don't have to be worried about where that conversation might be met, and you can just enjoy what that looks like. So maybe using that young person's interests to help connect them in spaces that might then go on to facilitate sort of broader conversations around these changes.
Yep, absolutely. And I think in terms of the other sort of day-to-day functional things like life, the hormonal changes that are experienced, and the changes, as we talked about, things like puberty, and I think from a female perspective, things like menstruation, like that's massive. I mean, I can't talk about that too much, but but at the same time, being able to understand what that individual needs and how that young person, particularly if there's, say, gender diversity there, or there is a different experience from this young autistic person, that they don't feel at home in their body, and being able to work through them with that. I mean, that in itself is a whole other topic of conversation.
Absolutely.
But those hormonal changes are massive at that time. So being able to feel as though there are people to talk to about that or share that experience, that's where health professionals are really important for that. The right services. In South Australia, we do have some really good services that support those those fields as well. So certainly something that a parent or a young person with a parent can seek out those supports to get some further advice.
Especially when I just feel like I hear from parents all the time that actually when they're working so hard to create these safe, low pressure situations that a young person might be able to share what they're experiencing, but how often do you hear they just won't talk to me, and it just has to be someone other than mum, dad, caregivers that offer some of these, and also just to be a team around that caregiver as well, so that everyone's feeling connected and everyone's feeling supported. But I think really importantly, knowing the diversity of what some of these experiences might look like, I think exactly like what you said, you do not have to have an answer for that. But if they do feel comfortable to share, just get curious around, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And I think also sometimes not how quick are we to want to jump in and problem solve and go, oh, don't worry about that, it'll get better. Because actually it might be in that moment with what they're feeling and the intensity of it in amongst these hormonal changes. Like for them, that's not how it's feeling. And just to go, man, that must be really hard. Can you share with me a bit more about that? And that's sometimes enough.
Yeah, validation is really, really huge as well.
And I know a line actually sometimes that I've probably learnt through working here where it's like, that must feel huge. Do you want me just to listen about it, or do you want to problem solve some stuff together? Maybe asking what that young person might like to get from that conversation too. Yeah. And knowing that just listening is doing more than you think sometimes.
Peaks and troughs. I had a conversation with a mum the other day about the fact that she, her young person is going into adolescence, and she was quite circumspect with the fact that, I know now after having years of having him that there are going to be periods where it's really good and there are going to be periods where it's a bit tricky. And the more I'm prepared for the fact that, if it's great, enjoy that. But knowing that around the corner we might have a tricky period, and just being prepared for that.
Yep.
You know, bracing for the big waves crashing against the ship.
Absolutely.
And being okay with that, and you know, sometimes you don't always have an answer, but you can certainly sit with it and support that young person where they're at.
Yep.
And just try and provide as much support as you can. And as
Absolutely.
you said, where you can't have an answer, that sometimes the best thing is to listen and just to have that ear. We didn't even talk about things like medication, because I know for a lot of these young people as well, there's obviously medication involved, and
Yep.
when you mix medication and hormones, a lot of things
Yes,
can
that's
happen.
very true.
That in itself is a whole separate thing. But
Yeah.
but
Probably even
certainly-
just like that chance to regularly check in with others that might be as part of your team.
Correct.
So whether it's
Yes.
the medication review
Correct.
or whether it's to support strategy
Yeah.
development and that kind of stuff.
yeah, very much so.
And actually, one thing I would say too, you know, when it comes to a lot of these bodily changes and what those hormone shifts might look like, that can feel super overwhelming if we don't have the language or the understanding about, well, what's actually happening in my body. So the chance to provide education like you would around anything else in a way that feels safe for that young person, whether it's having conversations, sharing experiences, watching videos, reading books, you know, trying to find a way that feels comfortable, but also knowing that sometimes these conversations don't feel comfortable at all, but just providing, incidental opportunities to lean in those moments. But there's, you know, I think even seeing how that's coming about in more like mainstream films, you know, I read the Disney movie. I think is such a great, like such a fun way to maybe even explore that, even if it's nothing more than watching it as a family and you're planting the seed, and then maybe it's coming back and going, well, what does that look like for me? And
I remember as a teenager watching, show my age, a TV show called Ready or Not. Do you remember Ready or Not?
No.
Okay. I remember it was the old days where it was like, warning, parental guidance recommended. It was like a PG show, but it was like teenage years, and it was this girl, and you know, they're talking about things like, you know, menstruation. I had no idea what this was. It's like it's like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid. And I remember always watching it and just putting the volume down. Didn't want mum and dad to hear me watching this. But it actually, I remember I learned some stuff from that. And I didn't fully understand it in that time, but it actually gave me some insight into what the experience is, albeit, you know, dramatized for a TV show. But sometimes those things are done in that way. And you know, whatever works that's going to be educational and is evidence-based can be really effective. And I think you're right. It's the other thing that I like to do is, when I was talking about the group, is to talk about this stuff with the boys. Like, guys, you know, you're teenagers, you know, who smells, who wears deodorant, like just chatting in an open forum about, I say to them all the time, I was a teenage boy once as well. I can empathize with you. Yes, I'm not autistic, but I definitely know hormones and things happen and things change. And like, I was there, right? You can get through it. And it's a pretty average time.
Yeah. And I think even just being able to maybe as a parent or someone supporting an autistic teenager, just being willing to share about your own experiences like we do with anything else, like model how you're feeling, model what your response might look like, model what some of these things, you know, even just going like, oh man, I smell, I need to go and get some deodorant. Then you're like, I know, once again, it's like kind of planting a seed, but it's also sharing it. It's a common experience. So it doesn't feel like, man, I'm the only one that's experiencing it like this, that it doesn't have to look that way. Yeah. So don't be afraid to share what that looks like. And I think the more that you can do that, even if you're not necessarily met with a response in the first instant, it might over time go, hey, I remember you said that one time. I actually would like to talk about it and see how it lands.
Well, I hope I don't smell after sitting here for that long.
I didn't know how to tell you, but
maybe that's a good time to end the podcast then before it gets too smelly. But thanks for jumping in and answering those ones. And
no, I can appreciate that it's, oh man, there's just lots of things going on for everyone involved in this time. And I think even just asking the question about what can I best be doing to support is pretty awesome. Because sometimes when you're just in the thick of it and you're trying to get through, you're just in survival mode more than anything else.
That's it. If anybody does have any questions they do want to send through, though, please send them through to our email, podcast@OTFC group, otherwise Instagram. Otherwise, if you're a TikToker, chuck them on TikTok and we'll do some rapid fire TikTok answers for you as well.
Yeah.
But thanks again, Eleanor.
Thanks,
and,
Michael.
Shout out to Mr. Fletch, and hope he is having a great time and listens to this, and when he gets through his...
learning about his body too.
Absolutely learning about that, and everyone else listening to it. And we'll speak to you all next time.
Sounds good. Thanks,
See ya.
everyone.